Episode 25, The Follies of 1832. Welcome back to Hidden and Distorted History of the Church, where we uncover the lesser-known truths about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or the Mormons. My goal is to reveal the authentic historical facts behind the Mormon Church. Recap. Last time, we delved into the real motives behind the infamous tarring and feathering of Joseph Smith and Sidney Rigdon, revealing that sexual misconduct was likely not the driving factor. We also uncovered the forgotten story of Jesse Gauss, why he was cast aside by the church, and examined Sidney Rigdon's ill-fated coup attempt during Joseph's absence. This video dives into overlooked yet crucial moments in Joseph Smith's history during 1832, a year of failed prophecies and disturbing revelations that laid the groundwork for even greater lies under Brigham Young's leadership. Part 1. The Face of God. On September 24, 1832, Joseph Smith made an audacious claim. Section 84 of the Doctrine and Covenants offers a glimpse into this troubling moment. Once again, Joseph received a revelation about the location of the New Jerusalem. But didn't he already claim to have received this very revelation just 2 months earlier, on July 20th? This time, God supposedly gave him the exact plot of land, the infamous Temple lot. Why did the omnipotent God have to reveal the location 3 different times? What's even more baffling is that this same temple lot would later spark a legal battle that dragged Joseph Smith's plural marriages into the spotlight. But that has been covered in a previous video. The question remains, why did God's directions seem to shift? Was Joseph improvising as he went along? Joseph didn't stop at this. He went further, prophesying that Zion and the New Jerusalem would be built during his generation, a prophecy that still haunts believers nearly 200 years later. That so-called prophecy has aged like milk, yet church members continue to await its fulfillment, blinded by faith to the historical reality of Joseph's failed promises. And as if that weren't enough, Joseph made another daring move. He directly contradicted centuries of biblical theology. The Bible, whether we look at the Old or New Testament, clearly states that no man can see the face of God and live. Exodus 33:20 says, "But my face you cannot see, for no man sees me and still lives." Even in the New Testament, John 1:18 and 4:12 repeat the idea, no mortal can see God. According to these verses, Moses, if he ever existed, spoke to God through a burning bush, never face to face. But what did Joseph do? He rewrote the rules. In D&C 84, Joseph boldly claimed that men can see God, as long as they possess the priesthood. Convenient, isn't it? Joseph introduced a brand new doctrine, one that rewrote the very foundation of Judeo-Christian theology. And he didn't stop there. He dragged Aaron, Moses' brother and the first Jewish priest, back to Adam, falsely claiming the priesthood was an ancient, unbroken line stretching back to the dawn of time. Joseph wasn't just creating new revelations. He was rewriting the religious landscape, bending scripture and history to serve his agenda, laying the groundwork for more deception yet to come. Part 2. Before the Mark of Cain. Elijah Abel wasn't just another convert, he was a trailblazer, a direct contradiction to the twisted theology that Joseph Smith and Brigham Young would later use to justify racism in the church. His story shines a spotlight on the hypocrisy at the heart of Mormonism's early doctrines regarding race. Born in Maryland, Elijah Abel made his way to Ohio in 1832, where he joined the newly formed Church of Christ. In September of that year, he was baptized and confirmed, not just as another member, but as one of the first African-American members of the fledgling church. His importance only grew when he moved to Kirtland, Ohio, to join the main body of the church and its leadership. On January 25, 1836, Abel was ordained an elder, a position of power and influence, with Joseph Smith himself declaring that Abel was entitled to the priesthood and all the blessings. Joseph's endorsement should have set a precedent. Abel was heavily involved in the construction of the Kirtland Temple, and he participated in the so-called Pentecostal season that marked the temple's completion and dedication. This wasn't just symbolic. Abel was later ordained a 70 and inducted into the third quorum of the priesthood, an honor unheard of for a black man at the time. By 1841, Abel was reconfirmed in Nauvoo by Joseph Young and Albert P. Rockwood, cementing his place as a prominent figure in the early church. Elijah Abel's significance cannot be overstated. Here was an African-American man, ordained to the priesthood at a time when even Joseph Smith's beliefs about slavery and race were all over the map. Smith's views on slavery fluctuated wildly, influenced by the social and political winds of the time. On one hand, he opened the priesthood to men like Abel. On the other, he began peddling the repugnant doctrine that the mark of Cain was upon the sons of Ham, and that black people were cursed, supposedly neutral in the fictitious war in heaven. Smith's duplicity laid the groundwork for the even more vicious racism of Brigham Young, who took Smith's teachings and ran with them. Young's complete ban on black men holding the priesthood, along with the revocation of Abel's ordination, revealed the deep rot at the core of Mormon theology. Abel, once held in such high esteem, was cast aside. Young and John Taylor even denied Abel the right to be sealed to his wife, a deliberate and cruel rejection of his humanity, all in the name of supposed divine revelation. Elijah Abel's story is one of early inclusion and later betrayal, showing how the early church, under Smith and later Young, was willing to twist theology to serve its leaders' ever-changing agendas. Abel's legacy, though often overshadowed, exposes the racist underpinnings that would shape Mormonism for generations to come. Part 3. The Thekot Witnesses and Explosive Book of Mormon Plagiarism Allegations. As we've touched on in our video covering the Spalding theory, the controversy surrounding the Book of Mormon's origins exploded in September of 1832, when Samuel Smith and Orson Pratt were preaching the Book of Mormon in Ohio. When they arrived at Conot Creek, they were confronted with something they likely didn't anticipate: allegations of outright plagiarism. The accusations from this small Ohio community weren't mere whispers. They came from individuals who claimed to have first-hand knowledge of Solomon Spalding and his manuscript found. While there's debate over whether the 8 so-called Thekot witnesses even existed, or if they lived in the area during Spalding's time, their testimony, along with that of Spalding's widow and brother, created a damning narrative that couldn't easily be dismissed. These witnesses allege that the Book of Mormon was, at its core, a repurposed version of Spalding's fictional work. Even LDS apologetic group Fair LDS acknowledges that there were plagiarism accusations floating around, though they try their best to downplay them. I won't rehash the entire Spalding theory here. I've got a dedicated video for that. But let's focus on the 1832 claims in Ohio. The Book of Mormon was barely out of its infancy, and already its authenticity was under fire. Multiple witnesses stated that manuscript found bore a striking resemblance to the Book of Mormon, minus the added religious flourishes like the inclusion of Isaiah. In the eyes of these witnesses, Joseph Smith wasn't a prophet receiving divine revelations. He was a plagiarist, stealing from the forgotten work of a deceased novelist. The backlash in Ohio was significant. Just like in New York, where the Smith family was well known and Joseph's reputation was less than stellar, Ohio had its own hurdles. In Conot, Spalding and his writings were remembered. The people knew manuscript found, and when confronted with the Book of Mormon, they didn't see a divinely inspired work. They saw a cheap copy. This likely explains why the Book of Mormon struggled to gain traction in Ohio. Joseph's charade hit a wall in a region where people could recognize the fraud for what it was. This was more than just opposition. It was the beginning of a widespread challenge to the very foundations of the Book of Mormon. The plagiarism accusations weren't isolated grumblings. They were a direct attack on Joseph Smith's claim to prophetic authority. And despite efforts by the church to suppress or ignore these early critics, the Thekot witnesses set the stage for a controversy that would haunt the Book of Mormon for decades to come. Part 4. Smith's redonkulous revelation about the Civil War. In the fall of 1832, the United States was already teetering on the edge of internal conflict. President Andrew Jackson had dispatched federal troops to South Carolina, where the state was threatening to secede over slavery and other issues. Tensions were brewing among southern slave states, and South Carolina's Governor James Hamilton, Jr. even threatened the White House on November 27th, warning that he would use force if necessary. The country was a powder keg, and everyone knew it. It wasn't a question of if civil war would happen, but when. And then, of course, Joseph Smith decided to seize the moment. On Christmas Day 1832, Smith declared yet another one of his so-called revelations. For behold, the southern states shall be divided against the northern states. Bold, right? Not really. It wasn't exactly a secret that the country was on the brink of civil war. Anyone paying attention could have made the same prediction. But Joseph, always looking to bolster his prophetic reputation, tried his hand at forecasting the inevitable. Except as usual, his prophecy fell flat. Sure, the Civil War did happen 28 years later. By the time war broke out in 1861, Joseph had been dead for nearly 2 decades, murdered in 1844. His grand prediction missed the mark by a long shot. And for a prophecy that was supposed to come from God, it's conspicuously vague and unimpressive. It didn't predict anything specific, didn't offer any insight that wasn't already circulating in political discussions of the time. What's worse is how the LDS Church handled this prophecy after it became clear that Joseph's timeline was way off. The Church quietly excluded it from both the 1833 Book of Commandments and the 1835 Doctrine and Covenants. They effectively buried it, hoping that the failed prophecy would fade from memory. Then, decades later, once older members were gone and no one was left to challenge the revisionist narrative, the Church reinserted the prophecy, completely out of context. They presented it as if Joseph had somehow foreseen the Civil War all along, conveniently ignoring the fact that he got the timing disastrously wrong. This wasn't prophecy, it was opportunism. Joseph Smith latched onto the political tensions of the time and tried to pass off a common prediction as divine insight. When it didn't pan out, the Church simply rewrote history to keep the illusion of Joseph's prophetic abilities intact. What does the LDS Church have to say on the matter? Not much. Their website states, on Christmas Day 1832, Joseph Smith received a revelation about a coming conflict between the northern and southern United States over the question of slavery. The war would begin, the Lord declared, in South Carolina, and it would eventually lead to warfare among all nations. At that time, a crisis had arisen over South Carolina's refusal to honor recent federal tariffs, and many Americans worried that the situation could intensify into a civil war. The government averted civil war at that time, but contention over slavery persisted, deepening the social, political, and economic divide between the northern and southern United States. Notice the strategic omission of the obvious flaws. There's nothing in this so-called prophecy that any average person couldn't have predicted. The tension between the North and South was common knowledge, and anyone paying attention could see conflict brewing. It certainly didn't require a prophet to foresee that, but let's not forget the parts they conveniently gloss over. For verily, thus saith the Lord concerning the wars that will shortly come to pass, beginning at the rebellion of South Carolina, which will eventually terminate in the death and misery of many souls. And the time will come that war will be poured out upon all nations, beginning at this place. First off, the war didn't come shortly. It was nearly 3 decades later. And as for the war being poured out upon all nations, that's utterly false. The Civil War was strictly an American conflict, not a global one. Nothing about Smith's so-called revelation came close to happening, as he claimed. The LDS Church continues to ignore these blatant inaccuracies while presenting a sanitized version that avoids confronting the failed prophecy head-on. In 1832, Joseph Smith's revelations and prophecies weren't just misguided, they were flat-out wrong. From failed predictions about the Civil War to fabricating divine visions that rewrote centuries of biblical teachings, Smith consistently twisted facts to suit his agenda. Yet the LDS Church continues to present these failures as inspired truth, conveniently omitting or distorting the parts that don't align with reality. History doesn't lie, Joseph Smith did, and the consequences of those lies continue to ripple through the Church to this day. Please watch for future videos, and thank you so kindly for watching. This is the Ex-Mormon Informant signing off for the day.